Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Fees on plastic bags and ride shares downtown, what Chicago's new budget means for yours. Local Congress members weigh in on the capture of Venezuela's president, the expiring of health care subsidies, the likelihood of another government shutdown, and much more.
All that hog butchering, wheat stacking, and tool making will really build up your deltoids.
And City of Big Shoulders, Windy City, Second City. WTTW News explains how Chicago got its nicknames. First off tonight, some people insured through the Affordable Care Act marketplace are hoping Congress passes a bill extending tax credits to more people this week. The subsidies expired at the end of last year, and officials say it means more than 500,000 Illinoisans could see their premiums increase. Among them, Cook County residents Doug Bouchard and his wife Shadeen, who's lived with the neurodegenerative disease ALS for the last 8 years.
Last year, her medical expenses were over $300,000, and so we have to have insurance. We can't afford not to have insurance. So, and not knowing the exact cost is very troubling.
Cook County healthcare officials say the ACA subsidies also stabilized care delivery by reducing uncompensated care and allowing patients to access services in appropriate settings like doctor's offices instead of emergency rooms. And we'll have more with Congress members on a possible vote over this issue in just a few minutes. Chicago police officers used force against members of the public 10% more often in the first half of 2025 compared with the first half of 2024. The police department is required to submit a mid-year report on its use of force under the consent decree, and this year's report also shows a 9% increase in the time cops pointed a gun at individuals over the same time period. A WTTW News analysis shows officers shot 13 people, killing 7 of them in the first half of 2025, which is more than the total number of people shot and killed in all of 2024. Our analysis also shows for all of 2025, police shot 22 people, killing 9. CPD will issue a use of force report for all of 2025 this summer. They did not respond to our request for comment. Cook County's first new chief judge in more than 2 decades just finished up his first month in office, and he's highlighting some changes he's making. Chief Judge Charles Beach says he's launched a new committee tasked with reviewing and improving communication related to violations in the court's electronic monitoring program. Created a new leadership role, the Director of Juvenile Services, to address issues of safety and fairness and work towards better outcomes for youth. Added 3 new deputy chief judge positions and appointed new presiding judges and supervising judges, and pushed to improve cross-department collaboration. In a statement, Beach says, quote, "These changes are intended to improve safety and make our courts more transparent, efficient, and fair." If you take the L into the loop, you might have noticed something different today. This is the first day of a 3-year closure for the station at State and Lake. The 130-year-old stop is getting a fresh new look with wider platforms, a much bigger canopy, and a flyover bridge, allowing riders to conveniently transfer between platforms. Train riders can board the CTA at nearby Clark and Lake or Washington and Wabash. The new station is slated to open in 2029. Up next, what Chicago's new budget means for your next trip to the store. Heather Sharon joins us to break it down right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
After months of debate, Chicago finally has a new budget. Our Heather Sharon joins us now with what that means for Chicagoans and their wallets. Heather, the city's spending plan for 2026 had to close a nearly $1.2 billion shortfall, which we knew about. How did they do it?
Well, with a host of new taxes and new fees, but not a tax on big firms for each employee that they have in Chicago. That was the big sticking point. Mayor Brandon Johnson really pushed for it. A healthy majority of the city council said no way. Also not in this budget, a grocery tax, which is going to save the average Chicago family about $100 a year. But people have to be sure to bring those tote bags because the cost of paper and plastic bags to take that food home, that's going to cost you double what it did last year. Also, it's going to cost you more if you call an Uber or a Lyft from an expanded downtown area. And it's really not clear whether more cuts or fees are in the offing.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the question that everybody, especially those who own property in the city of Chicago, want to know: are property taxes going to go up because of this?
Yes. The average Chicago homeowner is going to pay about $12 more a year to restore funding for the Chicago Public Library. That will keep about 70 positions that were set to be eliminated on the books. But the big increase that people will see is not going to come from the city, but the Chicago Public Schools, which hiked property taxes by the most they're allowed to under state law. That will add an additional $55 or so to the bills that are due for 2026 in 2027.
Okay. Mayor Brandon Johnson has repeatedly said that this budget is not balanced, that it leaves the city in a precarious financial position as the year starts. Why does it matter if the city's budget isn't balanced?
Well, if the city is starting off the year $163 million in the red, as his administration has said, that means the city is in danger of not being able to pay its bills. And it's very possible that the Johnson administration is going to have to come back in relatively short order to the city council and say, hey, we need to make some last-minute adjustments. It's not clear what those adjustments could be, but this is a start of the year in Chicago, financially speaking, unlike we've ever seen before.
Not the best start. A move to tax online gambling has already prompted a lawsuit, and a push to tax social media companies. It's likely to trigger a major legal fight. What else are you watching for now that is, now that it's officially 2026?
Well, the big question is whether Chicago will see a second consecutive annual downgrade in its credit rating. Now, this is just like your FICO score. If you've got a high FICO score, you're going to pay less to borrow money for a new car or get a mortgage for a house. The city's credit rating is already pretty low because it has a massive amount of debt and its budget has long been out of whack. So if the Wall Street agencies hit the city with another downgrade, it's going to make it that much harder for the city to keep the lights on and the trash trucks rolling, and it will make it very hard in the coming years for the city to sort of bring its expenses in line with its revenues.
Tough position for the city to be in. Heather Sharon, thanks again.
Thanks, Brandis.
And for more on the city's new budget, check out Heather's full story on our website. It is all at WTTW.com/news. As the new year begins, lawmakers are returning to a deeply divided Congress. In the weeks ahead, debates over extending Affordable Care Act tax subsidies and the threat of another government shutdown are expected to take center stage. Meanwhile, the Trump administration's capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife over the weekend has added a new layer of uncertainty to the 2026 session. Joining us with more now are Congressman Sean Casten, a Democrat from Downers Grove, and Congressman Jonathan Jackson, a Democrat representing parts of Chicago's South Side and South Suburbs. Of course, we also invited all Republican members of Congress from Illinois, but they did not respond. Congressman, we thank the both of you for joining us again. First off, I want to get your reaction to the Trump administration's military capture, of course, of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife over the weekend. Representative Casten, let's start with you, please.
This is, to say problematic is an understatement. It's a violation of international law. There was never any attempt to secure congressional approval. To the extent that they ever asked for approval, it was approval to attack drug running boats in international waters. And their argument for that was that it was because some drugs kill Americans and therefore selling drugs is an act of war against the United States. By that logic, American gun manufacturers are guilty of acts of war against Mexico. Um, it's going to be really hard to put this genie back in the bottle. When we get back, it's going to be critical that we have appropriate briefings, whether in classified or unclassified settings, and some degree of humility. Because if the Chinese, if the Russians decide to follow our example, this gets really bad in a hurry.
Congressman Jackson, your reaction?
Well, I agree with Congressman Casten. Following that logic, if this is the world of might is right, then that means that the larger army of the Russians can go into take Ukraine and take land. That means Saddam Hussein had a right to go into Iraq and go into Kuwait and say that was his 19th province. That means China can go into Taiwan. That means the United States can say some slave doctrine of the Monroe policy of having territorial supremacy in the Western Hemisphere, can claim the land of the Venezuelan people and say it's our oil. It's just wrong. And Venezuela, I must remind you, from Caracas to Chicago is 2,504 miles. It's walkable. You can ride a bike, you can drive a car. So it's going to further destabilize the country, what he's done.
Representative Casten, the War Powers Act of 1973, this requires the president to brief Congress on military actions within 48 hours of American troops' contact with hostilities. We know that there was expected to be a classified briefing between the White House and select members of Congress, mostly foreign affairs and I think some intelligence members this evening. What have you heard from the Trump administration?
So I personally have heard nothing. As of yesterday on our caucus call, the ranking members of our committees, Jim Himes, the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Smith, the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, they had not received any briefings either. What we were told was that the White House had reached out to some degree to a few Republicans in advance. And there's some meeting that's going on today. I'm going to call it the Kennedy Center because that's what Congress called it. But again, that's only with Republicans. And the Constitution doesn't say that you only give your party notification. It says you have to give Congress notification. So Congress is still very much in the dark on this operation, other than what we see in news reports. And I think we're all troubled by the fact that we had a classified briefing before we left. They provided no classified information other than location of some military assets before we left at the end of December, that is. But they also made it very clear that this was purely to attack boats in international waters, did not make any mention of actually invading a sovereign nation, much less kidnapping the president and his wife.
Now, the Trump administration officials, they have argued that this attack on Venezuela and the removal of the president and his wife, that this has been a law enforcement action that used military resources and therefore did not require congressional notification. But the White House has also used several different justifications for this action, some of it policing the Western Hemisphere, some of it being about oil and assets and all of that and how it impacts the United States. Congressman Jackson, what do you make of some of these explanations?
First of all, we were lied to at the secure briefing. They told us there would be no regime change very explicitly, and so that should be brought up. I mean, Mr. Pete Hegseth, I've asked for him to resign. He should resign. Members of Congress, we were elected. He was appointed. And he went through a confirmation hearing. He will not tell us the truth. We have an obligation to be told the truth so we can convey that to the American people. Who's going to pay for this? This was an appropriation that they skirted around. This thing easily cost $1 billion, $2 billion. There was no oversight. There was no meeting before the United States Congress to have us to have any sort of briefing on this. And then he's going to start this precedent and now threaten the government of Cuba, the government of Colombia. The man is becoming unhinged. And so we have to rein this power in. And this really lies with the sole power of Speaker Johnson. He has the power. People ask me every day, how can this happen? It's because of Speaker Johnson and the Republicans.
And as you were speaking, Congressman, of course, we were seeing a video there of President Maduro being escorted into, by officials being escorted into court there in New York today. President Trump spoke at a news conference Saturday morning in which he said that the U.S. will run Venezuela. Let's listen. Is not quite the soundbite that we were hoping to get to. But Congressman Casten, I want to ask you, the president has said that the U.S. is going to run the country. Do you think that's a good idea, in his words, to, quote, run the country?
The president has no authority to do that. Whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, I mean, let's be very clear. Maduro is a bad guy. It is true that Maduro was indicted in U.S. courts. That does not give any law enforcement agency the jurisdiction to go into another country. International law is pretty clear. You either need to go get go to the UN Security Council and get approval. Remember Colin Powell going and making those speeches at the UN Security Council before he went to Iraq. The alternative is if you have an imminent military threat to your country. None of those conditions were present. So you can't go in and say that I broke the country, I deposed the leader, and now I have the obligation to run it. That's putting an arsonist in charge of home repair. This is so far beyond the pale of the Constitution or international law or U.S. law. I think the only honest thing that Trump has said about this is that it's all about the oil, and I think we need to watch very closely to see what.
Congressman Jackson, I want to ask quickly, because I do want to move on to the tax credits, or excuse me, the Obamacare subsidies before we run out of time. But, the White House says that they are doing what many Democrats have called for over the years, and that is standing up to Maduro for a number of reasons. Is this not an issue where both parties actually agreed?
No, it's not an issue. We both agree. If this is going to be the new norm, if this is going to be the new rules of engagement, that there are 24 other presidents, prime ministers, kings around the world, that you would also exact this. We're going to start deposing governments all around the world. It's simply wrong, and it's not the truth. And so the president, at one moment, he wants to run the Kennedy Center. One moment, he's the commander-in-chief of the United States Army and the armed services. Now he wants to run Venezuela. I mean, the guy is out for a power grab. I mean, he's an egomaniac and needs to be reined in by the Republican leadership. And it's unfortunate that they didn't come on this program. We can't have honest debates and healthy debates in the Congress, and they won't even do town halls to face their constituents, and now he's embarrassing them.
So a bill to extend enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies for 3 years, expected to reach the House floor this week. Enough GOP members have joined the Democrats to bring this bill to a floor via a discharge petition. Representative Jackson, to you first, are you hopeful this will pass out of the House this week?
Absolutely. And once again, I don't want to fix the blame. I want to fix the problem. But the blame right here has to be fixed squarely on Speaker Johnson. People are asking, what are you all doing? How come nothing is happening? They have been given the reins of all the power. We have to pull it back in. The path forward, you have to register. You have to come out and vote in overwhelming numbers. And I think the Republicans are beginning to break, and you're going to see more people resign. You're going to have a record number of people that are going to seek re-election. And I hope that we continue to rein in some level of civility. President Trump is making this a very dangerous environment.
Representative Casten, if the bill to expand those ACA subsidies does make it out of the House, will it survive the Senate?
It'll be interesting to see, but I think I'm kind of optimistic about this week. We're going to have 3 significant votes this week. One is on the ACA extender. One is on overriding some vetoes from the White House on unanimous bills relating to some issues in Florida and Colorado. And then the third is we appear to be on pace to pass 3 of the funding bills we need to do to shut down by January 30th. All 3 of those are extremely bipartisan. All 3 of those are supported by overwhelming majorities of the American people, regardless of how they vote. But all 3 of those are require some degree of fortitude of standing up to the president. If you're overriding the president's veto, that's standing up to the president. If you're extending the ACA, given how much President Trump has demonized the ACA, that's a big deal. And in those provisions to fund government, we have things like, pulling Russ Vought into control, saying you can't use money to build an arch, in honor of President Trump in Washington. And I think we're seeing a number of our Republican colleagues who know better, who are willing to start standing up right now. And I think that's encouraging because the American people want to see Congress working. We didn't work very well in the first half of this term, but hopefully this will be a good start to the balance.
Congressman Jackson, are you confident? Because Congressman Casten just raised the budget issue because we know that you all passed that temporary funding plan to end the government shutdown from late last year. Government is funded through January 30th. Are you confident that we'll get another full year bipartisan spending plan here, or could we run into some issues?
I'm optimistic. I can't say that I'm confident, but I would like to congratulate the people in the Indiana legislature. They have Republican majority, supermajority in both houses and the executive branch, and they stood up to the president. They pushed back, and let that be a good sign at the end of last year, the momentum we can carry forward in this year, that Republicans are now
do you think that that's an
joining the
indicator
Democrats in the discharge.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you think that's an indicator that Democrats and Republicans in Washington will work together in 45 seconds?
Yes, that's where I'm gleaming hope from, specifically that action that came out of Indiana, in Georgia, in Florida, now in Mississippi, that the tides have turned. Democrats have picked up in Virginia and New Jersey. So yes, the tides have turned, and I'm excited about that.
All right, Congressman Casten, 30 seconds. What are your other priorities for 2026?
The big priority I'm focused on is we've been working for a long time on energy permitting reform, and specifically to try to accelerate the deployment of cheap energy. So stay tuned. We've got a fairly large piece of legislation to try to make sure that it's easier to deploy energy that's going to lower people's costs in the United States.
Okay, I'm sure we'll talk about that next time. My thanks to the both of you for joining us, Congressman Sean Casten and Jonathan Jackson.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Up next, WTTW News explains some of Chicago's nicknames. What's in a name? How about a nickname? Chicago has a lot of them. Where did they all come from? Erica Gunderson takes on that question in tonight's edition of WTTW News Explains.
When it comes to nicknames, Chicago sure has gotten stuck with some stinkers. Maybe it's because the city's actual name comes from a smelly wild onion. Or maybe it's because other cities like to drag our city through the mud. In fact, one of Chicago's first nicknames was Mud City. Accurate, if not exactly flattering. Then there's Chicago's best-known nickname, the Windy City. Sounds about right to anyone who's caught a face full of frosty lake wind in January, but Chicago is only the 12th windiest city in the U.S. A lot of folks think the Windy City moniker came from New York. When brash upstart Chicago was competing to host the 1893 World's Fair, the New York Sun editorialized our politicians as, quote, full of hot air. But references to Chicago as the Windy City long predate that slander. The Cincinnati Enquirer used it in an 1876 headline to report on a tornado that blew through Chicago, though historians say there was likely a double meaning at play there too. Fast forward to 1914 and a beefed-up Chicago. In his poem, Chicago, Carl Sandburg characterized the growing city as a young working man. In his words, stormy, husky, brawling. A line from that poem gave us the nickname City of Big Shoulders. Makes sense. All that hog butchering, wheat stacking, and tool making will really build up your deltoids. Chicago's most contentious nickname might be the Second City. Some believe it was sparked by the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, when the city had to rebuild, emerging as a stronger, more resilient Second Chicago. But Chicago was America's second most populous city for nearly a century, so it more likely started there. And annoyingly, it was a New Yorker's poison pen that made it stick. When writer A.J. Liebling found himself marooned in Chicago for a few years in the late 1940s, He wrote a collection of essays outlining all the ways he felt Chicago fell short of his hometown. The book was titled Chicago, the Second City. But in classic Chicago fashion, we embraced a name meant to run us down and used it to lift us up instead, because you, we're from Chicago.
You can watch our whole series of explainers on our website. Everything from how the city's grid system works to why Chicago's pension debt is so high. Just go to WTTW.com/explains. And that's our show for this Monday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm and sponsor of programming that offers continuing education to fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.